Back, everybody. We're just going to do a bit of a recap to start with to bring us up to date, because we're actually looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and the Sermon on the Mount is the longest recorded teaching of Jesus in the Bible. It takes 3 chapters, and it's one of those things that we know the bits in the Sermon on the Mount, but rarely is it all put together because it's so long. We take bits out of it and we look at bits without getting it all together. So I just want to just recap where we are before we move on to the next bit. So you're going to find this in Matthew chapter 5, 6 and 7. And just to put the context of the whole thing, this came at a point in Jesus' ministry. Jesus is very popular. People are coming from all over. So there's big crowds. And he's up in the Galilee area. I don't know whether people can all see this. This is a map of Israel at the time of Jesus. Jerusalem is down here. There's Jerusalem down here. Galilee is up in the north. And I've done this map for some to point out later on. But Galilee's up here in the north, and he's in this area. This was his main area. This is where Capernaum is. This is where Nazareth is. This is where 75% of his recorded teaching took place, and where most of his miracles took place. But it's up in the north. It's away from Jerusalem. So he's up in this area. And the Bible tells us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them." Now, I think this is quite important to understand the context of this. Here's the crowds, but Jesus leaves the crowds and he goes up a mountain. We don't know which mountain. If you go out there, they'll point to a mountain. They've got a place for everything out there, whether it is, whether it isn't. A mountain isn't like we think of a mountain. Mountains are really just small hills out there. And it says his disciples followed him. So this teaching is all to disciples, not to the masses, to disciples. Now, disciples, these are people who followed a rabbi in order to learn. These were people, they wanted to know. They wanted to be like their rabbi. Is that making sense? So these are people with a real heart. This isn't like an evangelistic address where it's, to everybody. These are people who are following him, and it says he sat down. Now that's exactly what a rabbi does to teach. Rabbis sit. They stand to read the scriptures. They sit to teach. They don't elevate themselves above the scriptures. That's the idea. And actually, several times in scripture, you'll find that Jesus sat. He sat in Nazareth when after he read from the prophet Isaiah, if you remember. And his teaching was, this day, this has been fulfilled in your ears, what he wrote about. And so this is teaching to disciples. They're just that's the context. And what we find is for when Jesus is what is the thrust of all his teaching? Jesus taught so much, but we find, and we've seen this, we've been here before, we've looked, what was the message? It was something called the gospel of the kingdom. That's the good news of the kingdom. The kingdom being the active and dynamic rule and reign of God. What's it like to come into and under that authority of God? And the good news, of course, is that we can have it because of what Jesus did. But what was it really like? Most of his parables start off, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like. Because the Jews had an idea about what the kingdom of heaven, but their ideas were flawed. And Jesus came to actually put them on the right track, as it were. Is this all making sense? So this is the background, and we're going to find, I think, as we go through this, some of the teaching is actually quite uncomfortable. It was never designed to be comfortable. It was designed, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, what does that actually mean? And that's not always a comfortable life. In fact, Jesus never said it was going to be a comfortable life. What did he say? In this world you will have tribulation. Yeah, you're gonna. If they persecuted me, what are they going to do to you? He said, they're going to persecute you. If they hate me, what are they going to do to you? They're going to hate you. It's not going to be an easy life. And so some of the things he's saying are actually quite deep. And it ends up, if you start to see, what he's talking about, the whole of the Sermon on the Mount ends up with two stories. And you know the stories because we use them often. But remember, it was to disciples. One was about the narrow and the narrow road and the wide road. There's the wide road, that's the easy road, but it leads to nothing. It leads to ruin, it leads to destruction. And that's the one most people follow. And remember, he's talking to disciples. He says, so, talking to people who want to know, he said, that's the one most people will go. The narrow road, the hard road, and the picture the Jewish person would have of that are these little footpaths that join the villages and mountain villages and desert villages. They're very difficult, some of them, very dangerous, some of them. He said, that's the road that leads to life, to Zoe, to relationship. But few even find the gate to get on it. There's not going to be lots of people on there. Most, sadly, will take the easy route. And that's true for, I would suggest, for many Christians today. It's staying on the narrow road is not easy. And then the whole thing ends up with Jesus talking about the wise and the foolish builders. The wise man who built his house on the rock, foolish man who built his house on the sand. And you know what happened? The storms came and the one on the sand fell flat. What was the difference? Jesus said they both heard the word. Mark says they heard the word, but only one applied it. They both heard it. One took it to heart. One did it. The other one didn't. And the only time you realize the problem is when the storm comes. It's the storm that tests the building. Does that make sense? But of course, it's too late then once it's collapsed. But we should be coming to that later. But all I want you to see is, hey, this is not comfortable teaching. It's quite deep and uncomfortable at times, but I think we can cope with that. It's now he started. Now, some time ago, we started on this because I say it's a long old journey, and the whole teaching starts with the Beatitudes. Remember that we did the Beatitudes. And talking about the place of blessing, Makarios blessing, supreme blessing. And it wasn't about money, it wasn't about big houses or good jobs. It was all about attitude of heart. All of them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Those who've got little of self. Why? Because theirs is the kingdom of God. Having little of self means you can have much of God. Those two are in conflict. It has been ever since the Garden of Eden. And we went through all of them. What's it like? Blessed are those who mourn. Mourn like God does. Mourn after sin. Those things that break relationship with Him, that causes death to Him. Blessed are the meek. And meekness we saw was not weakness, and that's power in harness. But all of them are attitudes in heart, attitudes towards God, attitudes towards people, attitudes, the same attitudes that Jesus had. Because Jesus he's the one all the way through this. He didn't just speak these things, he lived them out. He was the one who was the exemplar, and we're going to see this over and over again. Is that exemplar? Does that make sense? He was the example for us all, and so we went through all of those. So we spent some time going through that, And then last time we really took off up after that, where Jesus talks about your salt and light. Remember that? You're the salt of the earth. He didn't say you should be. He didn't say you should aspire to that. And I've heard lots of sermons that said, this is what you should aim to be. No, he didn't say it. He says you are the salt of the earth. And it's plural. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are the salt. You are the light. The issue is not whether you're salt or whether you're light. The issue is, are you doing what salt does, or are you doing what light does? If you're as salt, are you being salty? Are you giving flavor? Are you being that antiseptic? Are you doing what salt should be doing? Because if you're not salty, he says you're fit for nothing, just to be cast out and trodden underfoot by men. No value. So you are salt. God's put you there as salt. Are you being salty? You're there as light. Are we giving light to others? Are other people seeing our good works? Are they seeing what's going on in our lives? Because if they're not, the light's no good. If it's hidden, it's of no value. Now, maybe at the end of the day, we'll see how the day goes. Maybe if just see a convenient point, maybe change, because actually being different in the world is not easy.
This is from Lord Jesus to the disciples, not
to the crowd. This is all to disciples. All to disciples.
Between the crowds and disciples is like disciples believed in Jesus. So that's why you're saying you are the son. Crowds, I don't know if they fully believe in.
Well, that's right. I mean, exactly what the disciples believe. That they're still in the learning curve. They know he's special. They know he's doing miracles that only Messiah can do. They know that his teaching is amazing, and that's something that this Messiah was expected to do. But whether they actually grasped him as the Messiah, we don't know, because later in John's Gospel there comes a point where he comes out. Remember, we spoke about Jesus is the bread of life. He said, I'm the bread of life. You've got to eat me, you've got to drink my blood. And it says many of his disciples followed him no more. So there were people who were following him for whatever reason, but they were actually following him at that point, walked away. Only the 12 remained, and they went on to further things. But it's a very Jewish thing to follow a rabbi. Even to this day, and that the rabbis have a very high status in the Jewish communities, even to this day.
Will there be lots of rabbis and small groups following them, or how is it? Or one rabbi will be there with lots of people following them?
It used to, right, there's different types of rabbi. Rabbi just means teacher or master.
Yeah.
So if you were in school, your teacher in school would be a rabbi for the kids. But there was different levels. The top level was something called a rabbi with shmika. That means authority. Mm-hmm. He had authority to interpret the Torah, interpret the Bible. This is what the Bible means. Mm. It's called binding and loosing. You've come across that. That's a very rabbinical thing, saying, now this is how you interpret that. This is binding on your life. This is how you to live that. Or this is, you're loose from this. This is not binding. Does that make sense? Now, that was the highest echelon. And to be at that echelon, you would have studied under a rabbi yourself. You would have followed a rabbi. These rabbis tended to be itinerant. Their heart was to teach. They had a small group of people who would follow them everywhere, just like Jesus did. And they're following him not just to learn the teaching, but to learn everything about their rabbi. So when it got to the point, and it was usually at around about the 3-year mark, when the rabbi said, there's nothing more that I can teach you, he would then commission them, right, now you go and make your own disciples and you carry on this work. So your authority to teach as a rabbi came from your rabbi that had taught you. Does that make sense?
But how do these rabbis get trained? Where do they learn?
Because they've trained under a rabbi before them. And they've trained under a rabbi. And this is how it continues. And it goes, as far as we know, it goes right back to the time of the Old Testament, when it used to be the priest's function to teach. That was a priestly function. But when the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, and they were taken into captivity into Babylon, there was no temple. There was no sacrifices. There was no priesthood. And at that time, a lot of things changed. And one of them that we understand is you then had these rabbinical schools to try and keep Judaism alive. They started and they grew and developed. So by the time the New Testament comes on, they're firmly in place. You've got these rabbis, you've got synagogues, and it's not. But there were think of the rabbis. It was almost like denominations in our speak, because they'd have their own interpretations and they didn't always agree. In fact, they rarely agree. And they always say, get two Jews, get three opinions. You know, they're always arguing. But this is what they do. If you ever see the Talmud, where it's all written down after Jesus, it's basically, here's a bit of scripture, and this is what all the different rabbis say. But your authority... Talmud, yeah. It's actually like a library of books. It's not one book. It's like a library, and but
it's like how the scholars now interpret.
Yes, yeah. But of course, they mix tradition with it. They also some of them mix some mystery, especially today, Kabbalah, mystery things in. It's a mix. But you get the groups, and they've all got their different takes on things. But if you grew up under a rabbi, your authority came from that rabbi. You were teaching what that rabbi taught. What some of them did when they got to the end, they would go under another rabbi, and they get their teaching as well. And this authority to teach was very important in Jewish time, because when Jesus came along, you remember he came out with teaching, they said, where did you get your authority from? Do you remember?
Yeah.
What they're saying to him is, whose rabbi gave you this?
You got trained under.
Yeah. And of course, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him. Can you see now where it all goes? It's about, because when he challenged them, all right, what right had he got to challenge them? That's what they were actually saying. So that's what they do. That's what the rabbi, when they argue about things, they say, Rabbi so-and-so would say this, or Rabbi so-and-so would say that. There were two major groups at the time of Jesus. There was Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai. I might get them the wrong way around. One was very hard in his interpretation. The other was very lenient. Very, very laid back. You could basically do what you want. And very opposing views on marriage and divorce, opposing views. And very often when they're trying to trap Jesus, they're actually basically saying, which camp are you in? Is it this one or is it that one? And if you knew the background, from a Jewish perspective, that's what's going on. And Jesus very often didn't say, this one or that one. He'd say, it's this, And so often, as we see, as we go through this, he will say things like, you have heard it said, but I say unto you. So basically, you've heard what the rabbis have said. Now I'm telling you the truth. Because one of the things that Messiah was expected to do, they all knew they hadn't got it right. Because they were all different. But they knew that when Messiah came, he would bring the right interpretation. Is that making sense? Yeah. If you remember the woman of Samaria, now the Samaritans hold to the first 5 books of the Bible, They don't hold to the rest of it. So they held to the Torah. Even to this day, the Samaritans do that. They still exist. We've met them. We've seen them. We've met the high priest of the Samaritans. And if you remember that Jesus and the woman of Samaria, they have this discussion about worship, and she says, "Oh, when Messiah, when the Christ comes, he'll tell us all these things." And Jesus says, "I am He. I'm the Christ. I'm the one who gives the proper interpretation." And it's so interesting that one of his titles, and it's where John starts, is he's called the Word. He is the Word of God. He is the ultimate interpretation. Is that a very Jewish background? But of course, these people were Jews, and they were living in a time frame that's different to what we live in today. They've got different expectations, and we've seen this over and over again. I mean, we all know what it's like to live in different cultures. We know it's different. It's just different, isn't it? I mean, if you were taking somebody from this country back to India with you, what things would you have to explain to them to expect that's different to this country when they get there? Because they're going to find some differences, aren't they? In the same way, when you came to this, you found some differences, and some of them might have been harder to identify with than others. I mean, I know when I was, because I mean, a little thing, because when you go and you travel to these other countries, and you've done it now many times, you're trying to work out how society works, how to fit in. I mean, a big one for me in India was eating, because you've got left hand and right hand. That does never come into our thinking here, because we eat with knives and forks. We never touch it. It's a big thing, isn't it? Other countries, it's I go to the Philippines. In the Philippines, it's so rude. If you were to do this to a person, that's so rude. Anything that's overhand is, even the police, when they direct the traffic, they direct it all underhand. Because if it's an overarm movement, that's rude. No, it's not rude here, and we wouldn't think anything about it. It doesn't sound as though it's rude in India, but in the Philippines, it's very rude. And the thing is, what I found is that when you go to other countries, people realise you're different. Yeah. You can't help. I mean, especially if you've got white skin, you stand out in places. But they know you don't understand the language. But people seem to think that gesticulations are the same the world over, and they're not. What can be in Arab countries, you show the sole of your feet to another person. That's an insult. So you keep your feet on the floor. Is it? Okay. In this country, people would think you're daft if you say that. It's because people sit there with crossed legs and not worry about it at all.
If I'm sitting here, if I do like this, then it's rude. Like, I'll be
As
facing,
towards.
You see, now that doesn't. I just think I would say, where was I the other day? We were all sat there with crossed legs. It would never dawn on us because that's not part of the culture.
Yesterday we were just sitting here and chatting, Bob, and I would like to just stretch my legs and put a chair there. And I was just reluctant to hesitant to put my feet there because Jogesh and I and Sheetal were sitting there. And we said, no, it's okay, just relax, So it's like
okay. But this is different cultures, isn't it? And it's actually when you travel. I've had the privilege of travelling to quite a few countries and living with people in those countries, and it's not having that. Some things. I mean, I was in the Philippines. I was about to cross a road, and a hand came and said, "No." Why? Well, that's jaywalking. You can only cross a road at crossing points. Now here we just cross the road, and in India you cross the road wherever. But so much so that if a policeman sees you, you'll be fined. So even the laws are different. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And what was really horrible in the Philippines, and I didn't realise this until about my third occasion. Now, the Philippines, on the face of it, is not a promiscuous country. But underneath the surface, there's all sorts happen. But it's not something you see on hoardings or like this. But I hadn't realised until I was approached by a newspaper vendor. He got piles of newspapers, and he came up to me, and from underneath the pile, he brought out pornography.
Oh.
Now, he wouldn't do that to a Filipino. That would be totally rude. But he sees a white middle-aged person, and that's what they think of white middle-aged people. And I felt sick to think I'm walking down the road, and that's what people are looking at. They think that I'm there as some form of sexual pervert. That was not nice, because that's the other side of the coin. But it's different in different cultures, because you don't know what people think about you. And I know in the Philippines or up the mountains, the kiddies would come up and they'd rub your skin. They'd never seen white skin before. Is it real? And I can remember first time in India, we had to travel by train to. Was it the first time or second, whatever it was? We were going from Vijayawada to Nellore by train, and we were meeting people we'd never met before. We didn't know who they were. And you know how big the stations are in India. I mean, they're massive, aren't they? So the train pulled in at Nellore, we got off, and there's just hundreds of people. And Jenny says to me, she said, "How will we recognise them?" And I said, "You don't have to. They will recognise us, because we're the only white people in the whole place. There's no other white." And then sure enough, out of all of these people came the, "Are you Bob and Jenny?" "Yes, we're Bob and Jenny." It's been different. I don't know how we got onto that, but just except to say, in Israel, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different time frame, different climate, different food, different expectations. They in this country, and I think it's probably the same in India, the education is all about learning knowledge and facts and certainly, and it's a very, because that's presumably what the British exported to you, because that's our whole education system is based on exams and everything else, and that's a very Greek mindset. That's where it comes from. And that's very in the West, but most of the world. In Israel, it wasn't about learning knowledge for knowledge's sake. It was learning how to revere, how to be the people that God wanted you to be. That's very different. That's not something you sit down with a pen and paper and write an exam about. That's something that God looks at and says, yes, yes or no. Is that okay so far? So so this is where we go. So this is by way of recap. So we looked at salt and light, and then something which we we spent some time looking at last time was the next bit, which it says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And what's that all about? Now remember, we kind of touched on this already. Jesus is teaching to disciples, very rabbinic style here, and he teaching them basically how to live, what the kingdom is like, and he's saying that he hasn't come to abolish the law, the Torah. Now, by abolish, to do away with it, he hasn't come to abolish it. He says he's come to fulfill it. He's come to bring it to its fulfillment, to tell you the truth. He hasn't come to destroy the law. This is a very rabbinic way of speaking. See, if two rabbis were arguing about a point of law, the Torah, and the one says, "Oh, this is what it means," and the other one would say, "No, you're destroying it. You're making it of no worth." This is what it means. And Jesus said, I haven't come to destroy it, to make it nothing, to make it of no worth. I've come to tell you the truth. I've come to tell you what it really means. I've come to fulfill it. And he's the one that spoke with authority, speaking with the authority of heaven. And I say that's a very messianic thing that was expected. So it's, and as we go through this, we started to look. I said, what does that actually mean in real terms? And he said, he then takes some of the things that are in the Old Testament, and he said, this is what the Old Testament, but this is what it really means. And he gives this is what we were spending a lot of time on last time, talking about, firstly, about murder. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. And again, about calling them raca and all sorts. Now, the Bible does say, don't murder. And I think everybody in this room would probably agree with that. And there's probably nobody in this room that has murdered and probably wouldn't dream of doing it in the future. And do not murder, that's one of the 10 Commandments. No Jew would disagree with that. But Jesus goes one step further and he says, don't even be angry with your brother. Now, the principle here is quite simple. Murder, this is not accidental killing. Murder is deliberately killing a person. Deliberately say, I am going to take that person's life. In English law, it's the killing of a human being with malice aforethought. In other words, there's that desire to do it. Where is that desire? That desire's in your heart. Murder doesn't just happen like that. There is a build up to it that actually happens. And he's saying, no, don't even, if you want to know the full extent of this, don't even get angry in your heart. Because if you don't get angry in your heart, it's not going to result in murder. Does that make sense? Because the whole thing, all the way through this, you're going to find it's about the heart. It's about the heart. It's about what's going on in here. Because what's going on in here can actually materialize and affect the world around us. Is that making sense? And if we're all honest, there are probably people that now, we've never murdered. Has there any been a time when you thought, I wish that person wasn't about? I wish that you've been angry even to say, I wish that person was dead. That's what we're talking about. And Jesus is saying, don't even do that.
Even thinking of,
even in your heart.
I mean, that's a much deeper level. But he's not saying, he never says that the Torah was wrong. God gave it. God only ever gives good things. So it must have been a good thing for the people. But what man tends to do is say, God says that, how can I get round it? Or what's the least I can do to actually get the tick in the box? Does that make sense? And Jesus, and we do that. And you'll see this is very much the case as we go through this. What can I get away with? Where's the boundary? And of course, basically, if you don't know the one who's written the rules, you don't know where the boundary is. It's a bit like the lady with the list. Remember the lady with the list? It all comes from the heart, doesn't it? Get the heart right, everything follows. And that's what this teaching was about. Don't call anybody who says to his brother "raka." Raka means empty head, blockhead. It's something that the Jews did. That they think, oh, you're nothing. You're just an empty head. You haven't got it right. And write a person off basically what you're saying is that person is of no value, that person is of no worth. Hang on, God made that person in his image. It's a bit like when you murder a person, you are acting as God over that person. Only God has the right to take life. All life is his. But when you murder, you're saying, I'm God, and when you're saying blockhead, you're a waste of space, you're a waste of time, you're acting as God in that situation. And Jesus said, don't do it. And these are heart things. And the problem with the Jewish thing is they concentrated very much on the external. You can see whether a person murders somebody. You've got a body. You've got blood or whatever it is. You can't see what's going on in the heart. But God can, because he looks upon the heart. Is it all making sense?
Yes.
And this is all the way through, because the next one was about adultery. You've heard that it said, you do not commit adultery. That's one of the commandments. And, but where does adultery start? Nobody just says, I'm going to commit adultery. There's a build up to it. There's fantasizing or whatever goes on. And it's two people to get to that point. If you get it right in the heart, it's not going to materialize as adultery. And adultery is something that was very serious. The punishment was stoning. I mean, it wrecks, not just wrecks families, it wrecks social life and all sorts of. We kind of touched on this last time, but it starts in the heart. So Jesus says, don't even lust after another person. Don't covet them. Now that is also one of the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
But that's an internal one. And actually nobody other than God knows what's going on inside your heart. But people will see if you commit adultery. You see, get the heart right, the rest follows. Pardon me. Yeah, it's quite a simple thing, but this is why he says, I've come to fulfill it. I've come to tell you what it's all about. Yeah, you might not go around in life committing adultery, but how many people go around lusting after other people? And we live in a society where it's so sexualized that they will use sex to try and sell you chocolates or new cars or anything. What is marketing and advertising all about? It's about making you covet something that you. Oh, thank you. Oops, it's okay. That's something you don't need. That's the world we live in. You can't avoid it, can you? It's you can open your computer, not because you've done anything, but things suddenly appear on the screen trying to sell you something or hook you into. But it's all about coveting something, and often it's on the sexual side. And I suspect you're seeing more and more of that in India now. Oh, am I right? Because what little I've seen of India, it's moving towards that Bollywood type. Which is affecting, but that's what Jesus is saying. Don't do it, and and with that was divorce. Divorce was known in Israel because Moses said if what's the wording of it? If a woman displeases her husband, and a man could give a divorce. Actually, God hates divorce. Divorce is a break in a covenant, and God is a covenant maker and a covenant keeping God. Covenant is really important to God. I think we've been through this before. And it's, don't do it. I mean, we live in a world. I mean, Christians get divorced. The only time they're really interested in what what the teaching is if they can find, because they want to find a way to get out of the marriage they're in. Is that right? If they're happily married, they're not even concerned about divorce, are they? But they're always looking for the loopholes, looking for the way to get out of it. And when Jesus was asked about divorce, he didn't talk about divorce. What he talked about was marriage. Because God's heart is for marriage, to get it right. And that's permanent. It's but we live in a world of so many broken marriages at the moment. I think, and I think I told you this before. It's something that hit me when they were an American thing when they were talking to. This is big thing apparently in America with the young girls. Are you a traditional young girl or are you a modern young girl? The traditional young girls are what we would think of, the ones that want to grow up, fall in love, get married, have a family, and live happily ever after. Whereas the modern girls are the ones that just want to have fun and sleep around and do whatever. And they were interviewing these girls. And there was this whole load of girls who identified as modern girls. And they'd had all sorts of partners, and they were doing all sorts of things that we wouldn't want to go into. And they just asked the one question: what was your relationship like with your father? And not one of them had a good relationship with the father. Many of them didn't even know who the father was. Meant they'd come from broken homes or abusive dads, or they'd had multiple dads on the horizon. It was just, and nobody had to say anything because it just hit you in the face. That one question, because not one had a good relationship. So I just say that just your girl. I mean, you've come from homes where the homes are important, the family life is important. So that's good for your kids. I'm so pleased my grandkids, well, my kids and grandkids, there's a
family system.
Absolutely. Yeah. But so many of their peers are from broken families.
Yesterday I was reading the newspaper, and especially in India, they were telling, I don't know, I haven't heard this term, first time I've ever heard it. Silver splitters. Silver splitters. What it means, it seems, is people who have crossed the age of 50, grey hair.
Yeah.
They will start divorcing because at that time they would realize, I want my life, or I want to have my own life, and I have no. So they split after that, and that's why they gave this term silver splitters, and that is increasing. It seems even in India.
I don't.
First time I've heard it.
I've not heard the term before, but I know of many people, and it's about that when the family have left home, it's the kids that have kept them together. When the kids have left home, parents, well, what have they got left? And if they haven't got things in common, and if there isn't that bond, that's when they want to get. I think that happens in most societies, but that's silver splitters is that's a good definition. Yeah. But it's true, isn't it? And what's it all based on? That's actually based on me. I want to go my way. I want to do this. I want to do that, which I haven't done before. That's right back to the Garden of Eden of this. This is I will be as God. I will decide. I want. And it's sad, but that is the world we live in. All happy so far? Yeah. So you can see the thrust of this, can't you? And we finished off with oaths. Don't swear by God. Certainly don't swear by pagan gods. The Bible actually says that. But he's saying, no, don't. When you swear by God, you're bringing God into a situation. And if you break that oath, that's serious. That is actually bringing the Lord's name in vain. You're lowering him. He says, don't do it. Don't do it. And but a practice that was happening in Israel was they wouldn't swear by God because they knew how serious that was. But they'd come out with all sorts of forms of words which they had no intention of keeping the promises. And they were saying, well, these forms of words, well, they sound good, but they actually mean nothing. But I use them. And no, Jesus said, don't do that. Just let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. I mean, it's
Have you got any example of how do they, instead of God, what are the terms they use?
Okay, let me give you an example from this country this last few days, because it's one I had to wrestle with when I was in the police force. Let me give you the police force example, and I'll tell you exactly the same thing today. If you were to go into a court of law in this country to give evidence as a witness, you give it on oath. And that oath is supposed to be something that's binding on your conscience. Now, the common one is there's a Bible, and the oath would be, I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I should give should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Other faiths, they'd swear on the Quran if you're a Muslim, or it should be binding on your faith. Now, I wrestled with that because that very book that they want you to hold, it actually says, don't swear. And you get in the drift. And then I realized there is an alternative. There's an alternative. And it's a promise, basically. It's called the affirmation. Where instead of swearing, you just say, I promise. I sincerely declare and affirm of the word that I should tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I discovered that was actually introduced not for atheists, but for what was the group? Christians in this country, who said we can't take that oath, so they allowed them to promise instead. Okay, so it was actually introduced for Christians, and I can't remember. Anyway, the groups that did it, and I thought, oh, that's it, that's me. That's and my conscience then was settled because I could go and swear. But the problem is, people assume that if you're a Christian, you'll swear on the Bible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But actually, no, it's the very opposite. Now, the example I will give in the last few days is, we've just had an election in this country, and to actually sit in as a member of Parliament, you have to take an oath, and it will be in the same way. It'll be on something that's binding, so it could be on the Quran or whatever have you. And this year, it was in all the papers that we've got the most godless Parliament that we've ever had, because so many people refused to swear on the Bible. And yet, I know some of them because I've actually seen what they've written. They said, we can't, for the same reason in court, they said, I couldn't take that oath because I am a Christian, so I take the alternative oath, which is just a promise to do, to faithfully serve in that office. But the newspapers, because it wasn't on... Sorry? Well, it probably is, but not necessarily for the reasons that because people just assume that because people aren't using the Bible, it must be godless. I mean, it is a pretty godless group. I'm told there are about 60 Christians in there, which is not a big number.
For the majority they got.
Well, that's in the whole. That's the whole thing, which is what about 10% or something, which is
just about,
interesting enough. The Prime Minister is a self-declared atheist.
Yeah, he is an atheist.
But he's married to a Jew.
Yeah.
His wife is a Jew.
Yeah.
Comes from a liberal Jewish background. I talked about denominations. Well, there's everything from the ultra-Orthodox Jews right the way down to something called Reformed Judaism, and that's what they seem to. But at least she's a Jew, and they're bringing the kids up in a Reformed synagogue. So there's some real tensions, I should think, in that household over these things. But no, it was just about the swearing that is, because he's a self-declared atheist.
Some of the MPs they swear on Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
Five people.
Our
Okay.
Asians,
Yeah.
but they swear in Parliament. Yes.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah, it's the same as in court. It's something that should be binding on your faith, but it's just the assumption that people think one thing when the opposite is true, and that's where we got up to. And now we said we'd leave for today till we get to that point where we talk about an eye for an eye. And this is where we're at. Pardon me. So we're ready to carry on. It's 12 o'clock. We're okay. It's 1 o'clock. Okay. So let's go to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5. We're up to verse. We're still on the first chapter of the three that we're looking at, and this is from verse 38 down to 42. And it says this: "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth." Now that's a very well-known quote, is it not? It's actually an eye for an eye is a quote from the Torah. It appears in 3 different places. I'll show you where that is in a few minutes. And that's a phrase. I mean, you'll hear this in common parlance, and it's a phrase that's usually people are wanting to justify vengeance. You know, they took something from me, I'm going to take it from them. It's they hurt me, I'm going to hurt them. And it's been used to justify, or at least they've tried to justify it in that way. And it's even conflicts of war. One side do something and the other, I've got to retaliate, and it's all about vengeance. Tit for tat. And you're seeing a lot of this in the Middle East at the moment. When one side does something, the other feels they have to respond and do more. Not even the same, but they want more. But the question I want is that what the Torah is all about? Is that what it means? That we've got the right to inflict vengeance? That we become the judge, the jury, and the executioner? Is it that God wanted the whole world to become blind and toothless because everybody's doing it? I don't think so, especially when you read that it says in Leviticus, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's Old Testament. That's Leviticus 19, verse 18. Don't seek revenge, rather love. The Torah also says, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 35, it is mine to avenge. I will repay. And that's God speaking. He reserves the right. He's the judge. He's the one whose judgment is perfect. He has promised to actually do it. And therefore, that's something that is not left to people. to take revenge. So, and then there's the statement about turning the other cheek. If the first statement has been used to justify retaliation and even war, that second has been used to justify the exact opposite, isn't it? It's to justify all sorts of doing nothing, all kinds of non-involvement, regardless what the evil influence is. Or just turn the other cheek. And that's justified compromise and all sorts of things. So that's what the world uses as, what is the Bible actually saying? What was Jesus saying? Was he saying do nothing? Let every form of injustice and wrong go ahead? Bearing in mind that there were times that Jesus rose up, there were times that Jesus got angry, there were times that he overturned the money changers' tables, times when he challenged the religious rulers. He didn't just walk away. There were times when he actually got involved and challenged their practices and the way they treated others. And sometimes with quite scathing words like, broods of vipers and things like that. And yet, on the other side of the coin, there were times when he even allowed himself to be arrested and bound. He could have called 72,000 angels, but he didn't. He allowed himself to be taken away, legally tried, tortured, shamed, humiliated, and even crucified on a cross, like a lamb before his shears. In all of this, he's our example. What is going on here? What's it all about? What would his hearers have understood? Now, keep coming back to the point. He's speaking to disciples. It's important to those that want to be like him in character, in nature, in priorities, in values, in everything. And he's teaching what being a disciple is about, what life in the kingdom is all about, because it's what the king wants. That's the thing about the kingdom, is it's not what you or I want, it's what the king wants. The king is king of the kingdom. And all the time, you're going to find a principle all the way through this, is it's what's on the inside that comes out. And that affects relationship, not just with people, but it also affects relationship with Father. And so let's go through this. And remember, Jesus came to say he'd not come to destroy, that is, or to abolish the law. He'd come to fulfill it, not to wrongly interpret it, but to give it its correct interpretation, its full meaning. And that's what he's been doing all the way through to this point. And it's not that the Torah was bad. Because God only ever, I think I've said, God only ever gives good things. God gave the Torah, it wasn't man-made. The problem was what man did with it. It was their interpretation, because one of the things that we concentrated on before, it's if you're looking at it through a flawed lens, you're going to come up with the wrong answers. Yeah? And man is fallen. Man has come from, that's the big fight in all of our lives is who's actually sitting on the throne in our lives. Is it us? Is it God? Is it about self, or is it about Him? And if that compass is set to self, you're going to interpret things very differently as to if it's set to God. And the Jews and these various religious groups, and I think I've explained this before, the religious group, they treasured the law, still do. And one of the things that they would do would be to, they call it to hedge the law, to make it harder. Because their thinking is, if God says don't do this, if I actually make it harder, they won't do that. And a simple thing is, if God says don't drive faster than 50 miles an hour, they say, if we say don't drive faster than 30 miles an hour, we certainly won't be breaking God's commandments. But it becomes harder for the individual. And that happens over and over and over again. And the people, the Pharisees in particular, the Pharisees weren't a political group. The Pharisees were a religious group. You weren't born a Pharisee. You became a Pharisee because you wanted to please God. You wanted to live that life. So they were not bad people. I've always said, if you lived next door to a Pharisee, you weren't going to have late night parties and things. And they made the rules so hard for themselves. But the problem is they only ever concentrated on the bits that people could see. As we've said, it's the heart that's the important thing. The things you see are the outflow of the heart, but they concentrated on the external rather than the internal. And but the way that they did it, I mean, the Torah and living this life, it absolutely dominated their lives. They would pray 3 times a day, and if it was the time of prayer and they happened to be stood in the middle of the road, they'd stand in the middle of the road and they'd pray. And everybody could see them doing it. They would fast 2 days a week, and they'd made sure everybody knew they were fasting. They'd look miserable. They'd look the part because they concentrated on what people could see, the outgoing. Of course, the whole teaching of Jesus is it's always, hey, get the heart right. The external will follow, but of course, people can't see the heart. Only God can see the heart. And the problem with the heart is, as the Bible says, the heart of man is desperately wicked. It's deceitful. This is us. We need to get the right perspective. We need that right heart. We need that right spirit, which is actually a promise that God said He would do. He would renew a right spirit with the people. He would restore that heart. And so let's just have a look at this section, eye for an eye. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, his hearers, all of which were Jews, would have known that was an Old Testament quotation. As I say, 3 times. It was part of what they had to do as part of the covenant. It was part of what they had to do to be obedient. Now, let me read you the first one. Exodus chapter 21, verse 22. He says, if men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay, so that's say Exodus 21. That's part of the Torah, part of the covenant. But this is not about retaliation or vengeance. The Torah says no. You mustn't take. Vengeance is the Lord's. Don't take revenge. The principle here is actually quite reverse. It's that the punishment should reflect the consequences of the crime. There is a principle called it's lex talionis, and it's in Roman law, and it came into to British law, but it is the punishment fitting the crime. What it does is it actually limits the extent of punishment. Don't make the punishment greater than the crime. Does that make sense? That's actually what's going on here. Not you've got to do it, but that's totally different to what many of the pagan societies did and what many of our societies do today, where it's, when people want vengeance, they don't just want to do the same, they want to do more than. They want to really teach that person a lesson. They want to really know that, hang on, I'm really cross with this. You hurt me, or you hurt so and so. You are going to pay for that. Now, this is about limiting what they can do, and without that, if you go right back to the first murder in the Bible, when Cain slew Abel, it says if Cain is avenged 7 times, Cain was going, if anybody hurt him, he was going to 7 times, and with Lamech, he was going to be 77 times. And God said, no, there is a limit. It's man likes revenge, but God says, no, it's not about revenge. Revenge is mine. Punishment's a different thing. But as the children of Israel, they were going to be different to the rest of the world. It's
these people, the Muslims came up with these traditional things, is it?
Where did they come? Oh, I'm not an expert on Islam, but a lot of the original writings in the Quran seem to be based on the Bible.
Correct, yes.
So I suspect if you look in the Bible and you take it out of context, that's what you end up with. It's but can you see the principle? It's yes. The punishment reflects the crime. There's a limit, and you'll see this again the next time it comes up. Leviticus 24 verse 20. If anyone takes the life of a human being, he must be put to death. If anyone who takes the life of someone's animal must make restitution, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbour, whatever he has done must be done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and he has injured the other, so he is to be injured. Whoever kills an animal must make restitution, but whoever kills a man must be put to death. You are to have the same law for the alien and the native born. I am the Lord your God. Life for life, injury for injury. Now, life for life does mean life for life. And the principle there is if you've taken a life as a murderer, you've acted as God, and God says, "No, that's you've taken my place," and you don't. I once wrote an article on this in a magazine, and didn't I get some stick for it? But the principle is you've acted as God, and God says it's not about vengeance. You're doing it, and it's not the family that it's the government that should do it. Say no, it's about justice. It's about seeing that justice is done. And ultimately, if you follow it all the way through, if there was any other punishment than life for a human, Jesus wouldn't have had to have died on the cross. He could have been an alternative punishment. Does that make sense? You have to see it in its entirety. But this is it's so if somebody has lost a hand, there is a huge consequence to that person who's lost a hand. That person the other person's got to make it good. And it's not necessarily them losing their hands as well, but actually making them with the good hand that actually make good for the one who's lost it. Does that make sense? Not about mutilation. And the third time it appears is with false witnesses. And this is in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15. One witness is not enough to convict a man accused of any crime or offence he may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If a malicious witness takes a stand to accuse a man of a crime, the 2 men involved in the dispute must stand in the presence of the Lord before the priests and the judges who are in office at the time. The judges must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against his brother, then do to him as he intended to do to his brother. You must purge the evil from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. Show no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So the principle here is, if in court somebody's lying, deliberately lying against another person, whatever should have been the consequences now comes back to the liar. And if that was they're saying that somebody has died and they've been killed, this person's been killed. But whatever it is, the punishment comes back. Not to exceed it, not to be less than. That's to stop people lying in court. Now, the level of we've moved away from this in this country as well, and we run into some terrible trouble. The principle in Israel, because people say, oh, a bit like, the death penalty. Oh, you can get it wrong. Yes, you can, but the level of evidence required to actually come to that decision was a minimum of 2 eyewitnesses. Not circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is where you pick the pieces up like a jigsaw and make it fit, which we get into all sorts of problems with, because you can misinterpret circumstantial evidence. With 2 people or more saying, I saw that person kill that person. Does that make sense? Yeah. I know, I was there, I saw it. And if people say that and they're lying, then they're the ones that should be punished. But to actually convict a person of murder, most murders do not take place in the open. By the very nature of the crime, they do it out of sight, away from people. So it's actually very rare that you ever get eyewitnesses to a crime like that. Does that make sense? It was a very high standard. So people don't get the balance when they say, oh, lots of people can get killed wrongly. If you've got 2 eyewitnesses, that's...
Is that the standard criminal court?
The standard in criminal court the standard of evidence is beyond all reasonable doubt, which is a slightly different. It's a high standard, but of course all sorts of things can come in. I mean, the big one that's going through at the moment, there's been a lot to talk about, is the Lucy let me thing with the children. And she's a Christian. All her friends, and she came from Hereford, not too far from us, and all her friends say she would never ever do that. And nobody's ever seen her do anything. The whole thing is built on, well, when she's been about, children have died. And all the pathologists say, well, there could be natural causes to it. It could be that it's just a very poor hospital and she's taken her out. I mean, we don't know, but the level of evidence is very poor to actually and she suffered.
They're not letting her...
No, they haven't even let her appeal. But because of the judicial system in this country, you can't write about it in our papers. They've been writing about it abroad. And then people have written about what people have written about abroad, which you can do. But all I'm saying is it's circumstantial. You can get circumstantial evidence wrong. There was one piece of paper and she said, I must be a terrible person for what I've done. Or sort of words to that effect. As far as I know, that's the only bit. And they're actually saying, well, actually, if you're under that much pressure, you might think you were a terrible person. But nobody's actually seen her do anything. That's the thing. It's all circumstantial, and that's circumstantial evidence. Because what does that mean? That as I understand it, I mean, from a policeman's point of view, it's a very, very weak case.
So what do they decide about the verdict? Do they just let them?
Sure, she's still in prison. They won't even let it go to appeal. But all I'm saying, it's a classic example, and and we've got some noticeable examples in this country of where people have been convicted on circumstantial evidence, and then down the road, you actually find out, no, it can't possibly have been them.
And sometimes they wrongly put a person in prison for not committing itself. I mean, they come out of prison after many years.
Yeah. Oh, we've just had this whole thing with the post office, haven't we?
Yeah.
With all these wrong. It happens. That's not the standard of evidence that's required in Israel or in Bible time. 2 or more eyewitnesses. That's a but circumstantial evidence can lead to, you jump to conclusions, and the conclusions you jump to may be wrong. Because you have a series of facts and you say these series of facts point to this one. Someone says, no, that series of facts points to a different conclusion. Anyway, that's just, all I'm saying is our standard is less than the biblical standard. And the biblical standard was very, very high, but so was the punishment. And that's quite interesting because false witnesses, that's what they brought against Jesus. False witnesses came and they couldn't agree until 2 came at the end and actually said, he said he would destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. That was like, that was it. They were looking for false evidence, but they couldn't even get the witnesses to agree on the false evidence. The whole trial was illegal. It's very interesting to go through the trial of Jesus. In Jewish law, you should never have a trial at night. It should be in the day. There should always be, you never have the trial and the punishment on the same day for murder. This was all done at the rush because they wanted to get rid of him. Yeah. Are we all happy with that kind of principle?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. So Jesus is teaching this teaching this, and he actually said that he's teaching or at least Paul is teaching in the New Testament when he writes to the Romans in chapter 12. He said, "Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it's written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay." Revenge is not the principle. He's actually quoting there from Proverbs. Proverbs 24 verse 28. It says, "Do not testify against your neighbor without cause or use your lips to deceive. Do not say, I'll do to him as he's done to me. I'll pay that man back for what he did." It's not about revenge. The whole thing is not about revenge. It's about justice. It's about punishment fitting the crime. And that, generally speaking, worked quite well. Now, that's okay when you've got a consequence that you can actually measure. You can measure whether an animal's died. You can measure whether somebody's lost an eye. There is a physical consequence. What about when there is no injury except to a person's pride or their ego? It's where somebody has humiliated or shamed somebody else, which sometimes is more hurtful than physical pain. Is that right? It's
and that is what happened in recent days to like everywhere, more than physical.
Yeah.
Emotional damage.
Yeah. And this is and the desire to get even is quite intense, and because really, when you get down to it, somebody's pride, somebody's ego has been attacked here, and sometimes it can just be little things. It can be minor things. It can be thoughtlessness that actually ends up with a person feeling that they've been aggrieved, and now there's an inner wound. Shall I put it that way? An inner wound that wants revenge, wants the other to look foolish, wants the other to suffer.
It is satisfying the
Yes.
seeing others suffer.
Yeah, it's now you all know what I mean. Now the problem is often when a pride is injured, when the ego is injured, when we if it's left unchecked, if it's not dealt with, that grows in a person, and it simmers in people's hearts, and it can eat away at a person inside. It's a root of bitterness, the Bible would call it, and that grows. Even this week, I've come across people, Christians, who, if in church, if a couple walk in, another couple will walk out.
Oh no.
Where's that come from?
Yeah.
What's going on there? And it just, unless it's dealt with, it grows. They just won't speak to each other. They won't, whatever it was that started it all in the beginning, it's never been put right. It's never been brought into the open. And that's in church. When I used to, many years ago when I was a young policeman, I was working out in a up in the north of Shropshire. It's very rural up there near the Welsh borders. And on a Friday and a Saturday night, many of the farmers were coming from the villages into the town. They go for a drink and end up with a fight.
Yeah.
And there'd be family feuds that have been going for generations. Nobody can even remember what the feuds were about in the first time, but when they saw somebody from this other family, we got a fight. And it must happen in other societies. I know in the Philippines, I think I told you that the once I had to go and speak to it was called a pioneer work, not high up in the mountains, but up in the mountains. What a pioneer work can mean anything out there. But I get up there. This is village. It's not right up in the. They've actually got concrete houses, or some concrete houses. So somebody's spread a big tarpaulin and got lots of people. And I'm speaking to them, and usually when I've been out in the past, I've been so tired, not thinking straight, jet lagged. I get up in the morning with it, because we used to travel in the night, and also it's a wonder we kept going. I mean, just really would. It was not something to be proud of. I was just tired the whole time, and I can remember talking. I got up in the morning, had this thought to speak about Laban and Jacob, and the distrust and the relationship. And I got halfway through this talk, and I think to myself, I don't know what I'm saying this for. It's not making sense to me. It's probably not making any sense to them. All these people there. I don't even know how many people there, because you couldn't see everybody, because some of them were in the bushes and that out of sight. And then when I finished and I sat down, the interpreter, he starts calling people forward, and this mass of people came forward. And I we've got tears, we've got people praying, and I'm thinking, I don't think he's leading them in a prayer of salvation, because usually I can work that out, what's going on. I hadn't got a clue what was happening, and I'm watching it. It's all in a foreign language. And what I found out afterwards was this village I was in was at war with the next village. And this was the whole village coming saying, we're sorry, we got it wrong, we're going to make friends. And it all changed. Now, I didn't know that. And I'm so pleased I didn't know that, because if I did know they were at war, the last thing I would have spoken about was relationships. Does that make sense? I didn't know the background, but we came away from that.
You don't want more trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I had first time. One of the places I used to go to was as another village, and they had exactly the same thing happen to them, where they were at war with the neighbouring village. Revival broke out. They all made peace with the neighbours, and they changed the name of the village to Shalom.
Wow.
and he got a tremendous reputation in the area of this village. So it happens. It's I don't know how I got onto that. Yes, about root of bitterness springing up.
I mean, that's what Zion Fellowship about. So that's what we tell people. Like we're new church now, new fellowship. So we're growing.
Yep.
So don't get to a point where yes, yeah, you can't stand someone. That's why we keep saying don't get too close to each other. Get into their personal lives, what's happening, and all that, and then reach to a point where you and
if other group comes or if other family comes, that they quit or they stop coming.
yeah, we shouldn't reach to that point. So be in your limits. Look after each other. Not that you shouldn't look after each other, but don't get into their personal things and what's happening in their life, and don't go to that stage. But yeah, be in your limits, and then let everyone who walks into our church, they should stay. They should stick, and they should stay. Don't get into these misunderstandings and all that, and then if that person comes, then okay, we're not coming.
Yeah.
But that's been a problem these days. I think after COVID, people socializing. Sometimes, in some cases, it's good to be expressive. Some people do not say. They might be carrying heavy in their heart and so many things, but they don't have anybody to express. Some people feel like, oh, if a church, even in our church, we have a women's gathering and all. We always feel, I mean, all the women when they share, they say, oh, it's good that we do this. So we share all our things, in some cases it's good to express. It's good to express, and then we kind of say what we have experienced, and that may help them or something like that. And also now these days, people are more jealous if you tell about their stories and all. People are like,
gossiping, and talking to
So that's the problem. It's very difficult.
It's about the two groups. Some are like they think they're super spiritual. They think it's that kind of group where they think, oh, if I share this, I'll become a weak point in among them. So I better not share. Getting too familiarized with each other, also they think, and
I think we're oops.
I hear.
Is that? I think what I'm hearing here is two different things. We know the reality that this can cause. So on the one hand, you're wanting to stop that, but on the other hand, people need it. So how do you get it without causing because to be different, living different lives like ships in the night, that isn't what God called us to either. I mean, where it'll come down to is it's all down to the heart. Don't take offence.
I mean, what my point is like in the church, like sharing the testimony or praying for each other. That's all right. So, but what's happening now is, after the church or during the weekdays,
particularly
in Zion in general,
outside.
So going out together somewhere and getting too close, and then too familiar with each other and getting too close, and when you're too close, you share things as well, isn't it? So, and then that person shares that private talk with somebody else.
Now you're into gossip, aren't you?
Yes, and then they come to know that they have shared with somebody else, and then okay.
And if at all the sermon is about something, they think, oh, okay, just because they know about our personal things, the sermon is about them. They think that the sermons are targeted.
Well, this strikes me as it's in the heart of the receiver who's thinking that. Because it may have the person who's speaking may absolutely have no idea at all. God may be using them to correct them, but we're taking it personally, and the whole teaching is don't take it personally.
So we had that experience, running a fellowship. I mean, we didn't stop. Obviously, we can't do that. Stop talking to them, but we just limited ourselves. So we are getting into too much discussions. Then we are unable to preach what we want to preach.
So, and that might hurt other people. So we're just limited and then just go by what, God, how God leads.
Yeah, I mean, but sometimes the challenge is needed. But it's all about heart. It's about the heart of all the people. And gossip is a terrible thing. And there's a lot of gossip in churches. Even, dare I say, in some of our prayer meetings, where I think some of the prayers, they're not, when they're open, it's not praying to God. They're telling everybody else in the room. What have you come across that?
Yeah.
We know exactly actually, God knows. The rest of the people don't need to know. And there's wisdom in here, and it's all actually about heart attitude. I mean, if I had to take offence, I was in the police force for years, as you know, and some of the things I've been called down through the years are absolutely unrepeatable. And if you were to take offence, that would affect everything that I ever did. I don't think I take offence. But
it matters. The attitude with which you are praying.
Yes.
That is the key. I mean, if somebody's praying, if all his attention is about God and opening his heart, rather than trying to negotiate something in their prayer. And
it's just like the Pharisee and the man who prays, "Oh, I'm not like that person. I'm not like this."
I remember once one a preacher shared a testimony about his life. So he got married, and the first time when the wife and husband met, and they were praying, it seems, and the wife prayed, finished the prayer, and husband, after her prayer is finished, he said, "Now you are my wife and I'm your husband. If you want to share anything, you can share normally. You need not have to share through prayer." She prayed so much in prayer, telling him what she wants.
Conveying the message,
I think when we get to prayer,
through God,
because
person,
when we get to prayer, some of these things might, because it's actually in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus teaches the people how to pray. So I think, but this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. So maybe not for everybody to know, but maybe I want this one here to know. It's but
they're different. So there are different types of prayers.
There are different types of prayers. But we're going back to this business of where somebody now, somebody insults somebody else, or somebody, whether it be accidentally, whether it be deliberately, but somebody's taken offence. What Jesus said was, "Do not resist an evil person," or as it says in the King James, "Resist not evil." What it actually means is, don't compete with evildoers. Don't. If you like, we'd say, come down to their level. Does that make sense? And if people are going to do it, don't come down. Don't fight evil with evil. We've got to be above that. As it says in Proverbs, do not say, "I'll pay you back for this wrong." Wait for the Lord, and He will deliver you. And because it's the Lord. The reference to that is Proverbs 20:22. So you can see that. And he goes on to say, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. Now that meant something very much to Jewish hearers. The word is rapizo, literally open hands you, slaps you across the face. There's a different word for punch. This is not about being punched in the face. This is about being slapped. So it's not about a physical injury. This is when somebody slaps you, that's a deliberate putting you down, isn't it? And to be slapped on the right cheek, a right-handed person, to slap you on the right cheek, has to slap you at the back of the hand. Does that make sense? That is this is not about self-defense. This is somebody deliberately doing it, and a backhanded slap is in that culture was a real put down. It was a real insult.
I think, hitting, slapping the back of your hand.
Yes,
That's
because
very big insult.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we have even in our English now we have that's a right backhanded slap you've had. This is what we're talking about. It's a real insult, but it comes from the back of the hand. And when somebody does that, particularly in a culture where shame and honour were so important, that is a gross indignity, a huge offence. And this is what they did with Jesus when they slapped him at his trial. That was not just this. This was a huge insult. And the word there is rapizo. It's the word. It's the word that we just used. That the God of all creation, the one who could call on 72,000 angels, allowed that to happen. And but it's a deliberate, calculated, demeaning insult, and it's twice as insulting as a front-handed slap. It's so you can see the pictures Jesus has painted. What happens if somebody does that to you? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with a wounded pride? Will you take offence? How will we respond? And Jesus says, well, turn the other cheek. Don't take offence is what that means. Do not allow it to injure your soul. If necessary, allow them to do it again. And just like Jesus. You see, taking offence is a choice. You choose how to respond to an insult.
Is the scripture reference?
For what? Sorry? That's in the sermon. That's the Sermon on the Mount.
Don't take offense. Choice.
A choice. That's not a scripture. That's just a fact.
Can you repeat that?
Taking offence is a choice. It's not a scriptural reference. That's just a fact. If you choose not to take offence, it's not going to hurt you. It's how we respond to it. And
I think nowadays that's lots happening, Bob. Like even for silly things, people are taking offense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not discriminating, but I mean, it's everywhere now. But especially in this country, even like at workplaces, you can't even say like like you can't even say he or she.
Yeah. Because somebody might be offended.
Yeah.
Might be offended.
Yeah.
Well, hang on. That's a choice to be offended. You don't have to be offended. Now, we've got ourselves into a right mess over this one in this country. But it's...
Last week or before that, someone was sharing that he's got into a new job as a supervisor and he had some 8 or 10 people working under him. And out of them, 2 were women and dressed women. That is, 2 were dressed as women, they appeared as women. So he had to tell them about the premises, the workplace. And he showed to the men saying that this is the men's toilet, and to the women he said this is the women's toilet. Because they were dressed like women, they were appearing like men. And they went and complained against him, saying that how can he say point us to the women's toilet? How can he?
But that's how you do. That's how.
He should have just told them that these are women's toilet, these are women's toilet.
Not particularly showing them
this is for you, this is for you, not like that. He should have just.
But he was probably doing it with the best will in the world. It wasn't done maliciously, I suspect.
No, it was just.
But people had taken offence. Oh yes, yeah.
That diversity, equality, all this cultural thing coming into transgender.
LGBT,
It's becoming too much. I mean, it's really wrong. Even if we address he, she, unless if it is they, then yeah, the pronouns.
The other day we went to IKEA, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
we couldn't believe what we are seeing. They made a like rainbow cake, like pride cake,
Right.
and
Yeah, it was Pride Month last year.
and under that they mentioned that okay, this is to support LGBTQ, and obviously kids they doesn't know anything. As
Yeah,
soon as
they
they
were
see
asking, oh, it
colorful
looks
cake,
colorful.
yeah,
I
they
want
want
the
to eat
rainbow
it. But
cake.
we told them like no. I mean, if you eat them, it's not that you can't buy the cake. So if you buy this particular piece of cake,
Yeah,
then
support
we're
them.
supporting them. So if you want, we can buy it. Yeah, we bought
Something
another
else,
cake, but
yeah.
but
But it was so appealing to the kids because it's so colorful.
Of course, yeah.
They were like, oh, it's a rainbow cake. I want it.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But since we've deviated in this country from our law in this country was based on biblical principles up until when it's all gone a bit adrift since the last World War. Really, we've just moved away from it. Yeah, and we think we know better than God, and we are in a mess, and it's getting more so by the day, isn't it?
I know it is very difficult even in the churches when preaching. People are becoming too careful in not to preach the word of God, and they want to just satisfy the crowd.
Yeah.
And that's why they are not even hearing something. Not that we are intolerant or want to be hurting them, but truth needs to be preached.
Of course, it does. Okay.
If you have to condemn something, you have to. According to the Bible. Yeah.
No talk about sin, repentance, or salvation.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing.
Absolutely right. We preach a very weak gospel, and it's about what's it come down to? It's about the fear of man.
Yeah.
Because we're frightened of upsetting men.
People get offended and they preach on us.
But the gospel is an offence. The Bible tells us that, and it's one of the things that about 13 years ago now that we started. There are many things in the church that are not preached. We don't think, because people will take offence. Now, if you ever talk about the second coming, the end of the age, there will be people who want to take you to task and argue with you. If you talk about Israel, there will be people that want to take you to task and argue with you. If you talk about creation, they'll want to take you to task and argue with you. So those areas, those are just three classic areas that are rarely ever preached from the Bible. They're not rarely ever preached in our pulpits because they don't want to cause offence. Yet the Bible, I mean, did I read the other day, somebody said there was 1,800, I think it was 1,847 or 37, 1,847, I think it was, references in the Bible to the second coming.
1,847.
Something like that.
Wow.
It's a major part of the Bible, but people aren't preaching it. So therefore, how are people going to be ready? How are people going to be looking and waiting for when he comes? Because he's coming. It'll be like a thief in the night. It'll catch them unawares, because we don't, except for that. And it's all about the fear of man.
They either want the appreciation of the people, or they think that if I preach like that, next time I won't be given chance. So what? Preach the gospel. That's the end of it. That's fine.
It's one of the things I like about, I mean, we're right off the subject, but I like men's meetings, because a lot of our churches are full of ladies. And if you're not careful, you end up preaching a gospel message or any message that appeals to ladies. And it's different to fellas, because ladies will take offence at different things to fellas. And you end up then with a very one-sided type of preaching in some churches, whereas get a fellas meeting and you can say it as it is. You can say, well, come on, guys, you are not doing what you... Because you can talk very bluntly. And there's something about, fellas will fight, and they'll have a fight, and then they'll go off as big mates together after a fight. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ladies don't do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They were doing this different. They have different tactics.
Very different tactics. Banter in the workplace where men can be actually quite rude to each other, but it's almost like smart. The ladies get so upset, but the fellas are actually quite. it's different. But all I'm saying, when that comes into the church, you end up with it affects what's coming from the pulpit, and it's usually not a good effect.
I think taking offense is a choice. It's more meant to
Taking offense. Oh, it's a choice. It's a choice.
No, don't take offense of it.
Someone was saying that India and China should have ladies as the leaders.
Oh.
So if there is anything that they do not agree with each other, they'll stop talking to each other and there won't be any war.
Peace.
Yeah. But just going back to so we just finish this off, because I know we're coming to time. This is not a new concept that Jesus was preaching. In fact, the rabbis would preach something very similar. They would say that turning the other cheek is not weakness but strength. That the strongest person is the one who can turn an enemy into a friend. That's a rabbinical saying. But of course, knowing it and doing it are two different things. It's the writer to the Hebrews actually says this: make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Just don't let it happen. Don't let that root of bitterness grow. Stop it. We're called to be like Jesus. As I say, in Caiaphas' house, he was slapped. He did not. He did not seek revenge. He was tortured. He didn't seek revenge. He had a crown of thorns put on his head. He was ridiculed publicly, mocked, and even when he's on the cross, it says that people hurled insults at him. He didn't retaliate. He didn't open his mouth. Not in retaliation. His only prayer there was, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. It's that word forgive them means to let go, to dismiss it, to abandon it, just not let it affect what's going on. And that's what he's calling us to do. It's, for Jesus, reconciliation was far more important than revenge. It's on the cross. It says it was for the joy that was set before him. He enjoyed the cross, scorning its shame. That joy, it's one of my favourite verses. That joy, I believe, was seeing you and I in relationship with him for eternity, and he was prepared to put up with the shame and to consider it nothing that might happen. So this is about our attitude. We're almost there. So turn the other cheek. Just to quickly finish this bit we've started in. Just to let you know, the teaching is consistent there, because Peter will say in Peter 3:9, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. It's about living in harmony. Paul says to the churches in Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 5:15, make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. And then what happens if somebody wants to take you to court? It's in the same thing. It goes on to say, if somebody wants to sue you, to take you to court, what should your attitude to that be? Now, this is in a situation where they've got some reason to do that. Maybe there's a debt. Maybe there's something that's gone wrong, and they want their day in court. How does Jesus tell us to do with that? He says, well, if they want to take the garment off you, give them your cloak also. And just realise that most Jewish people, most men, had just two items of clothing. They had an undergarment and an overgarment, a cloak. Now, in the Jewish law, and you'll find this in Numbers, that if you were to take an item of clothing as a pledge, the outer clothing, you had to give them back at night, because that was their protection against the elements. That's what, in fact, here we are. If you lend money, this is actually in Exodus 22. If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not be like a money lender. Charge him no interest. If you take your neighbour's cloak as a pledge, return it to him by sunset, because his cloak is the only covering he has for his body. What else will he sleep in? When he cries out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. There's a limit to what you could do. And here the picture is, if they want to take your inner undergarment, which they're entitled to do, let them take the outer coat as well, which they're not entitled to do. You know, it's more important that the relationship is secure than it is about fighting for rights. We have a lot of talk these days about my rights, but it's not about our rights. It's not about what we deserve. It's about our God. And Jesus said, don't let this harden your hearts. Just like Jesus, Jesus didn't hang on to anything. He said he became nothing. He made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. This is the God of all creation, gave up all that glory, gave up everything to come and be amongst us, come and live at a time which was a very difficult time to live under Roman oppression, come and have absolutely nothing, emptied himself even of reputation. Do you know, we've been talking about pride and what have you. Reputation, when somebody slurs your reputation, that's a horrible thing, isn't it? But Jesus was prepared to become of no reputation for you or I. He was prepared to be despised, prepared to be rejected by men, prepared to be that man of sorrows, prepared to be familiar with suffering. Even when he went to the cross, they took all his clothes off him. When he went to the cross, I mean, most of our pictures in our stained glass windows and our Sunday school books will show a very clean Jesus, and with a dignity. When he went to that cross, he was naked. That was shameful. His body was that bruised and battered. It was unrecognizable as a human being, like a root out of dry ground, it says. You might have a flower, and the flower might be beautiful, but the root, when it comes out of the ground, that's not a pleasant sight at all. That's what Jesus allowed himself to become for us. Didn't hold on to anything, and to become a curse. And he did it without retaliation. He did it without fighting them. I think that's how prepared are we to do these things? How important is our reputation? How prepared are we to hold things lightly? How prepared are we to suffer injustice? I think they're big questions. How do we deal with insult? How do we let go of some of these things? How prepared are we to trust God? And then the last thing it talks about is when someone forces you to go 1 mile And he says, go with them too. Now, you know the background to that, I'm sure. The Romans, it was something that came originally from the Persians, but a Roman official could force you to carry their pack for 1 mile. Roman roads, there are about 50,000 miles of roads in Roman times, and they had mileposts. That's where we get our mileposts from to this day. We've got Roman roads in this country, usually dead straight. And, you know, if a Roman centurion could come and say, I want you to carry my bag, you might have just come from that place. Takes no account of your needs, your desires, or what have you, how inconvenient it is. You're obliged to carry that for 1 mile. Now that can be very disruptive. That can be very annoying. That can produce a root of bitterness. How do you deal with that? Well, Jesus said, go the second one. Go the second one. Don't let it eat you. Don't let it get to you. You know, they could force you into sin. They forced Simon of Cyrene to carry his cross. That was something he couldn't refuse to do. So this is about attitude to authority. It's about attitude to those who have got some control over us. Jesus didn't say, "Oh, don't let it happen. Don't fight. Don't fight. Resist." No, he didn't say, "No, just go the extra mile." Because what's more important is not the bag. What's more important is your heart. What's more important is what's going on inside you. And it's the second mile that always shows the character. It's the second mile that really demonstrates what's going on within. It's and Jesus went all the way. He never held back, did he? He could have said no. He could have said, I don't want to go through with this. But his prayer was, not my will, but thine. And I think that's what our hearts should be like. And the final thing then, is really the final thing. What happens if you are the lender? We've talked about being on the receiving end. What happens if you're the one in authority? What happens if you've got some control over somebody else? You've got the ability to lend to others. It actually said when we read for it, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. If we've got something, and someone comes with a need, what do? How important are they to you? I mean, Jesus told a parable that the chaplain came at midnight and wanted loaves. And that was a real nuisance. That was a real awkward time to come, and the family were asleep and it was going to disturb the whole house. What do you actually do? Well, Jesus said, no, give it to them. What's important is not letting the situation get on top of you, but making sure your heart is right. Don't withhold it from them. Don't be mean. Don't be selfish. It's and that's nothing new. He's only reiterating here what's already in the Old Testament again. Deuteronomy 15, verse 7. If there's a poor man among your brothers in any of the towns of the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards your poor brother. Rather be open-handed and freely lend him whatever he needs. If you lend money to one of my people among who is needy, do not be like a money lender. Charge him no interest. You see, it's not about self. It's not about us. Whatever we've got belongs to the Lord anyway. It's about our heart towards it. Our heart should be like Jesus. And he did everything out of love, everything out of grace. He was not selfish. I mean, he went to that cross because we had a need, not because we deserved it. He withheld absolutely nothing from us, not even his life. That's our God. And that's the sort of people he's calling us to be. Amen? Amen. Amen. Well, we carry on because it afterwards, but I think this is the right time to stop.